Women of South Africa, on this Women's Day, I greet you, the inheritors of the noble legacy of the women of 1956. 64 years ago, our mothers, daughters, sisters, and grandmothers, and great-grandmothers stood defiant and proud, united in their demand to live in freedom. They stood not for themselves alone, but for the rights of the generations of women yet to come. This day provides all of us with an opportunity to reflect on the road we have traveled as a nation since then. As a country, we have made much progress that we can be proud of. We have made gains in advancing women's rights, in broadening women's access to education, in the provision of health care and social support to women, and in improving their participation in the economy and decision-making. At the same time, we know that the lived reality for millions of South African women is very different to the promise that is contained in our Constitution. We know that millions of South African women still live in conditions of poverty and unemployment. They face discrimination and violence all the time. To give effect to our commitment to the upliftment of women, South Africa has joined Generation Equality, a global campaign to achieve gender equality by 2030. As part of this campaign, we are part of two action coalitions, one on economic justice and rights, and the other on gender-based violence and femicide. These action coalitions mobilize governments, civil society, and the private sector for collective action. They give us an opportunity to work with other world leaders to achieve real change in the lives of women across the globe. As we mark Women's Day this year, South Africa is in the grip of two pandemics, the coronavirus pandemic and the scourge of gender-based violence and femicide. Ever more women and children are being abused and losing their lives at the hands of men. It cannot be that this Women's Day is drenched in the tears of families who have lost their sisters, their daughters, and mothers to violence that is perpetrated by South African men. This cannot continue. We can no longer, as a nation, ignore the deafening cries of women and children for protection, for help, and for justice. It has been 11 months since I addressed a joint sitting of Parliament to announce an emergency response action plan to combat gender-based violence and femicide. Since then, we have taken concrete actions to provide greater support and care to survivors of gender-based violence. We have increased the number of shelters and care centers for survivors and improved the capacity of our police to deal with the crimes of gender-based violence. We have made important progress in reforming our laws to give greater protection to survivors of domestic and sexual violence. We now also have a national strategic plan, which, among other things, aims to promote women's economic inclusion. One of the most important ways to reduce the vulnerability of women to gender-based violence is to enable them to become financially independent. With the launch of Generation Equality and with the implementation of the National Strategic Plan, we have a unique opportunity to refashion our society and the lives of the women of our country. We have an opportunity to build a country in which women's rights to dignity, to security, to safety, and to protection is not negotiable. It requires bold and measurable actions by government, civil society, the private sector, and all actors for meaningful change. Today, we commit to a new social compact with the women of this country, informed by our collective commitment to gender equality. This will be driven by bold actions. The first action is to expand the access of women to economic opportunities. We will do this, amongst other things, by setting aside up to 40% of public procurement for women-owned businesses. We now expect national departments in government to monitor and to report on how many women have participated in each public procurement process. They will have to develop clear plans on how they will broaden women's participation over the next 12 months. As the chair of the African Union, we will also be working on policy guidelines to help member states on our continent to develop similar interventions. The second action is to support women who operate small and micro businesses, including those who operate in the informal sector. Lack of access to financial services, as well as digital identification, tends to limit the participation of women and their ability to conduct business. Under Generation Equality, we will be supporting African Union member states in their drive to adopt digital IDs. We will engage the financial sector to strengthen efforts to make financial services accessible and affordable for women in South Africa. The third action is to speed up the process of giving women access to productive assets, such as land. We will ensure that our own land reform process favors all historically disadvantaged people, including women, in getting land and the means to farm it. Of the 75 million rand in COVID-19 relief earmarked for farming input vouchers, 53% of the beneficiaries will be rural women. We must ensure that women, subsistence, and small-scale farmers continue to receive support beyond the lockdown that we are going through now. At the same time, we will be calling on the African Union member states to put policies in place to increase women's ownership of land to 30%. Our fourth action is to ensure that women are safe from gender-based violence in the workplace. Through Generation Equality, we will work at a national and regional level towards the ratification of the International Labour Organization Convention on Violence and Harassment in the Workplace. The urgency of achieving gender equality has never been greater than now. The coronavirus has left none of us untouched, but it is those who already face economic insecurity, poverty, discrimination, and exclusion who have been hardest hit. To support the fight against gender-based violence, the Solidarity Fund has approved a 17 million rand project to expand shelter services and support the network of Tutuzela care centers. A portion of this funding will also go towards capacitating the Gender-Based Violence Command Center to ensure women are not made more vulnerable during the lockdown, we have put mechanisms in place, not just for social support, but also to help women-owned businesses. Of the 12.6 million people who have received social grants during the month of June, 10.5 or 83% were women who are aged 16 years and older. As of this week, about 1.4 million South African women have received the special COVID-19 social relief of distress grant. The food parcels distributed through the Department of Social Development and the Solidarity Fund have reached just over 1 million families, among them women-headed families. In the second round of food relief, the fund will distribute this month in the form of vouchers. Some 40 to 50% of the target beneficiaries will be women. COVID-19 relief is also being provided to women-owned SMMEs through our development finance institutions. For example, of the total number of SMMEs benefiting from the Debt Relief Finance Scheme, 33% are women-owned businesses. The Industrial Development Corporation, the IDC, has also directed a significant portion of its funding approvals to supporting youth and women-empowered businesses. We have prioritized Black-owned and women-owned businesses in the procurement of personal protective equipment. There has been a number of success stories of women either starting businesses to produce personal protective equipment or modifying existing business operations. We are deeply concerned about the corruption that has marred our national effort to make PPEs accessible to our hard-working social and health workers. We expect the law enforcement agencies to find the culprits and ensure they face the full might of the law. This pandemic has demonstrated our ability to support the greater economic participation of women in real terms. This good work must not end when the pandemic is over. We must maintain the momentum. The generation of 1956 mobilized, organized, and stood firm in their demands for their rights to be respected. The women who, in the recent past, have taken to the streets demanding an end to gender-based violence and femicide carry forward the flame of that struggle that the mothers, the sisters of 1956 embarked upon. Under generation equality, we want to see women's full empowerment achieved by this generation within a generation. This is our responsibility as a nation. It is our goal. If we each play our part, we can make this happen. The time for talk is over. This is now the time for action. I wish all the women of South Africa a happy Women's Day. I thank you, and I wish you the very best.